we can be the generation that ends it for good.
Malaria must die, so millions can live.
This is DW News coming to you live from Berlin. Moscow sends thousands of troops to attack Ukraine's industrial heartland as part of its new offensive in eastern Ukraine. The Kremlin says capturing Donbass is now its main objective. Also coming up, Russia's seizure of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant at the start of its Ukraine invasion had the world fearing an atomic disaster. Weeks after their withdrawal, more of Russia's dangerous actions there are coming to light. And Germany's foreign minister kicks off her tour of the Baltic states with a clear message for Moscow, vowing NATO will protect every corner of its territory to defend freedom. Plus, growing fears in Lithuania over Russian aggression, as many worry their country could be Moscow's next target. Some are preparing for the worst-case scenario. Hello, I'm Terry Martin. Good to have you with us. World leaders have condemned Russia's latest offensive in eastern Ukraine. The Kremlin is seeking to make up for recent military losses around the capital, Kiev, by seizing control of Ukraine's industrial heartland. The city of Mariupol is also under heavy siege, with military commanders warning the city could fall within days, if not hours. Efforts are underway to open a humanitarian corridor, allowing civilians to leave. I should warn you, our next report contains images you may find distressing.
On Ukraine's eastern front, soldiers dig in for the fight ahead. Russia has relaunched its offensive, hoping to take full control of the Donbass region. In the besieged port city of Mariupol, the fight may be almost over. This is our appeal to the world. This could be our last appeal of our lives. We are maybe facing our last days, if not hours. The enemy outnumbers us 10 to 1. While a sense of normal life returns to the capital, Kyiv, in cities to the east, the war rages on. The intensity of fire by Russian troops in the Kharkiv direction, in Donbass and in the Dnipro region has increased significantly. They still consider ordinary housing infrastructure normal targets for them. In this war, the Russian army will forever inscribe itself in world history as perhaps the most barbaric and inhuman army in the world. At this hospital in Kramatorsk, the injured continue to arrive, wounded by this second Russian offensive. Since yesterday, Russia started a large-scale advance in the area. They use artillery systems, heavy artillery, drones and GRAD systems. In Kharkiv, families say their last goodbye to those who were killed in the fight. Russia's invasion may have entered a so-called new phase, but the pain of loss is a constant in a war that's far from over.
While civilians are trying to leave Mariupol, Ukrainian troops there are determined to stay put. They're asking for international support, but what kind of help can they expect at this point? I put that question to Halina Valeshchenko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament.
Thank you for the invitation. First of all, of course, to lift the siege of Mariupol, Ukraine needs heavy weapon, and this is our appeal to different governments of European Union and all over the world that we really need help with heavy weapon. And the second thing where different international governments can help is that any country can be like a mediator between Ukraine and Russia in the process of humanitarian and skipping corridors, because Russians are lying. First, they agree for these corridors, and when civilians, women and children try to get out from Mariupol, they are just killing them, and they are just shelling all the cars or buses where these civilians are trying to get out in these humanitarian corridors.
I do want to ask you about that diplomatic track in just a moment, but first, back to what's happening in the east of your country. Russia has launched a major offensive there with the aim of controlling the entire east of your country. Ukrainian forces are fighting tooth and nail, of course, to prevent that, but should Russia succeed in Donbass, what will that mean for the future of your country?
We hope that Russia will never succeed in the east, because you see how bravely our armed forces are defending our country and how all our people in Ukraine are united, and everyone in the country is doing everything he or she can to help our armed forces. Everyone, both in the government and all people, they are working in the other parts where the difficult things are not like in the east. And the day they are working at their works, and at the night they are volunteering, they are helping to our armed forces.
Now, peace talks between Kiev and Moscow are currently stalled. Do you see any chance of reviving them?
Of course, we are hoping. We hope that some peace talks will help. But as you see, all that Russia is saying, all the time they are lying, and it is difficult, for instance, for Ukraine to adopt such things as they want in these peace talks. For instance, our desire to become a member of NATO and member of European Union are fixed in our constitution, and only Ukraine can tell whether to be in NATO or not to be, whether we want to be there or not any other country, because we are an independent state, and it's our choice, a choice of our people.
Do you think that this war can end without Ukraine giving President Putin of Russia at least part of what he wants?
I think that Putin will never get what he wants from Ukraine, because what he wants from Ukraine, he just wants to destroy all the country and to kill as more people as he will desire. But all the world has seen what we have done through this during this approximately 2 months, and how bravely, I will repeat again, how bravely our armed forces are defending our country. And all civilized world is really now helping us to defend our values and our democracy.
Halina Valeshchenko, a member of Ukraine's parliament, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Russian forces failed in their attempt to take the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Are they doing any better in the eastern Donbass region? Here's an assessment from Frank Ledwidge, a former UK military intelligence officer.
Well, Terry, the first thing to be said is this is an attritional battle where Russia may make small gains. And indeed, we're seeing that. They're nibbling away at the Ukrainian lines in one or two of the more vulnerable areas in the Ukrainian position. But they're going to lose this battle. They have started this operation too early. No competent military force would have taken 2 weeks to try and reset from a major defeat in the north. The Russians did, which indicates two things. First, they're under political pressure. And secondly, they're trying to outrace NATO supplies to Ukraine, the heavy weapons that Halina there was talking about. Russia faces huge problems. They've taken 30% casualties so far, not enough mass. They really haven't the experience to conduct this kind of operation. So my assessment is they remain in serious trouble.
So you doubt that Russia will ultimately take Donbass despite Russia's military superiority, because it does have more firepower than Ukraine, does it not?
That's all it has, Terry. There are several aspects to military power. Halina very capably outlined one of the major ones, which is the moral component. And I won't repeat what she said there about the moral element, the fact that Ukraine is defending its own country and so forth. But there's also the conceptual, which is the element of planning, and material. To conduct a successful attack of the size the Russians, or any size actually, that the Russians are trying to accomplish, you need a 3-to-1 overbearing, 3-to-1 superiority. Russians haven't anywhere near that. What they do have, though, is artillery. That's heavily dependent on logistics. Ukrainians are attacking that, and the Russians have demonstrated they're very poor at that element of warfare.
What, if anything, Frank, do you think could change the game for the Ukrainian forces? Would more heavy weapons, more artillery be enough?
Yes. The Russians, well, I say enough. I don't think you can never have enough firepower as one of the precepts to remember. But to answer your question directly, what the Russians don't have is reserves. What the Ukrainians are trying to generate are exactly that. And with assistance, they've had considerable assistance so far from the likes of Poland, from the US, less so from Germany, from the UK as well. They're trying to generate and will generate reinforcements and reserves. And those reinforcements and reserves are what are likely to prevail, if heavy weapons continue to flow their way, are likely to prevail in this war of attrition.
OK, just one quick big picture question for you, if you don't mind. What do you see as the broader implications of this war for security in Europe? Because it looks rather bleak at the moment.
Yes, matters will stabilise in due course. I think, for what it's worth, I think this war is going to go on for much of this year. But what Putin has achieved is extending NATO's border with him from essentially Estonia to the 1,200 kilometres of Finland, who are likely to join. NATO will be far stronger at the tactical, operational and strategic levels, and Russia severely militarily, I can only speak to the military, militarily weakened now for many years to come, whatever the outcome in the Donbass.
Frank, thank you very much for talking with us. That's former military intelligence officer Frank Ledwidge in Oxford. Early on in its invasion of Ukraine, Russia seized control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the site of the world's worst nuclear accident. It was the first time that a nation has occupied a nuclear plant as part of its war strategy. Weeks after Moscow's forces left, reports continue to emerge of the reckless and extremely dangerous actions they took there.
This is one of the most radioactive places in the world. Yet for more than a month, Russian soldiers lived here, digging deep into the contaminated soil of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Ukrainian officials say that bunking down in the zone's so-called Red Forest may end up costing some of the troops their lives. In the Red Forest, where Russians dug trenches, they lived here, breathed in dust here, cooked their food and set fires here. So grass was burnt, and they inhaled burnt substances. Of course, it will damage their health. It will kill some of them slowly, and some of them will die quickly. But Russia's occupation of this site put more than the lives of its soldiers in danger. For a time, the decommissioned plant was cut off from the power grid and forced to rely on diesel generators to keep critical safety systems running, sparking fears of a new nuclear disaster reaching well beyond Ukraine. When Russian troops hurriedly left at the end of March, they looted offices. Some reportedly even stole highly radioactive materials, possibly to sell. Ukrainian authorities are still unable to monitor radiation levels at the site, after soldiers also stole the system's main server. Chernobyl was never ready for a military occupation. With the Russians gone for now, and the anniversary of the 1986 disaster approaching, authorities are working to make sure it will be more prepared in the future.
And here's a look at a few other developments in this war. The UN Security Council has met to consider the war. Ukraine's ambassador urged members to address what he called Russia's dubious presence in the chamber. Russia's representative accused the UN of using Ukraine as a pawn in their geopolitical game against Russia. The International Monetary Fund has cut its global forecast for growth this year to 3.6%. They say the war and Western sanctions are putting pressure on the world economy, which is already seeing a slow recovery from the pandemic. In the 8 weeks since Russia launched its invasion, over 5 million Ukrainians have fled abroad. That's according to the UN Refugee Agency. More than 200,000 third country nationals have also escaped to neighboring nations. Russia's aggression has triggered the fastest growing refugee movement in Europe since World War II. Ukrainians forced to leave their homeland often endure hardship and danger before reaching safety in other countries. Volunteers who bring in vital supplies and transport women and children away from the fighting can also face hazardous journeys.
These volunteers in Kyiv are loading this old city bus with supplies and food for the people of East Ukraine. Ralph Kuban is from Germany. He's the co-founder of IMEZ, an organization which transports people out of crisis zones.
We're planning to evacuate this village. We have one contact person on location. It's very close to the fighting zone, and we expect the fighting zone to expand and include this area.
It's a 530-kilometer journey from Kyiv to East Ukraine. After a small breakdown and a 12-hour drive, they arrive in Losova. Things have to go quick, and they immediately start unloading. At any moment, the fighting could flare up again. The Russian troops aren't far. Evgenia is leaving her hometown with a heavy heart. Her parents want to stay.
We're going because the children are suffering and crying. Warplanes are flying overhead. There are explosions. It's hopeless. I'm worried about my parents.
It's time to say goodbye to the last remaining men. Many women are already on their own. Their partners gone to fight for the Ukrainian army. I had my doubts because I didn't want to leave my husband behind. He is in the Territorial Defense Forces. Of course, I'm worried about him. The people leaving can only take a few personal items and a small suitcase with them. They're deeply traumatized.
My children and grandchildren have fled. They went to Pulheim near Cologne. I was alone here. I am a school teacher, but now there are no more children to teach, so I'm leaving too.
Ralph Kuban ready to head back. He says one reason he wants to help the people here is that he comes from Ahrtal, an area in Germany which was recently heavily flooded.
When you've experienced losing everything you have from one day to the next, you want to help others going through the same.
He brings the bus to safety out of East Ukraine. It's a long drive, but tomorrow they'll be in Poland.
German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is in the Latvian capital Riga today to meet with her counterparts from the Baltic states. In a press conference alongside Latvia's Foreign Minister Edgars Rinkēvičs, she reaffirmed Germany's commitment to the security of the three former Soviet republics, which are now all members of NATO and the EU.
Today, the four of us are sending a clear message to Moscow. We will defend peace, sovereignty, and freedom. NATO will collectively defend its territory and protect every corner of it.
The Baltic states have been among the most vocal critics of Germany's Ukraine policy. Our correspondent, Yuri Rishetto, was covering the German foreign minister's meeting in Riga. We asked him how it went.
Well, the atmosphere is, though, very friendly. It's a meeting, let's say, under allies. The German Foreign Minister Baerbock underlined the importance of the Baltic countries for the security for all of Europe. Here at the press conference, she said when Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody awoke to a new reality, and Germany will face this new reality with all its consequences. That means every inch of NATO territory will be protected. Baerbock said Article 5 of the NATO treaty is undisputable. Article 5 states that if one NATO country is attacked, all NATO members will respond. Also, Mrs. Baerbock defended the view of the German government and the German Chancellor Scholz, who decided to give Ukraine more than €1 billion instead of arming its military with heavy weapons. Critics see this as a German reluctance to act against Russia. However, the Latvian Foreign Minister Rinkevics added how important and reliable Germany is as a NATO partner. He further underlined the importance of German military presence in neighboring Lithuania.
Now, the Baltic states have been warning their allies about the threat Russia poses for a long time. How big is the fear there, Yuri, that they could be Putin's next target?
Well, the fear is there because Russia under President Putin has become an unpredictable neighbor for all countries along its borders. It doesn't matter if it's Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, or even the Baltic states. The Baltic countries in particular share a painful history with Russia. They were part of the Soviet Union for almost 45 years after World War II, and many people here call it an occupation. After the Soviet Union fell, they were the first to declare their independence again in 1990, and they definitely don't want to lose this independence. Especially people in Lithuania. This Baltic country borders Russia, exclave of Kaliningrad, which has been massively armed in recent years. And this is exactly where we went. Last week we met Lithuanians who are worried and arming themselves against a potential Russian attack. Let's have a look.
The politicians here are saying NATO must create a very, very strong deterrence against Russia.
DW correspondent Kilian Bayer reporting from Latvia. Thank you so much, Kilian. I want to tell you now about the other headlines. Yemen has sworn in a new presidential council. The internationally recognized body was appointed this month after former President Hadi stepped aside, I should say. The move was meant to unify the fragmented anti-Houthi camp amid ongoing efforts to bring Yemen's long-running civil war to an end. And Brazilian football legend Pelé has been hospitalized in Sao Paulo. The 81-year-old is receiving treatment for colon cancer. His clinical condition is being described as good and stable. Last year, Pelé spent a month in the hospital, but this time doctors expect him to be discharged in a matter of days. Wimbledon organizers have confirmed that Russian and Belarusian tennis players have been banned from this year's tournament because of the war in Ukraine. The ban prevents a number of top-ranked players from competing in June's Grand Slam event, including Russia's world number 2, Daniil Medvedev. The war has already prompted tennis governing bodies to ban Russia and Belarus from international team competitions. All right, let's find out more and dig deeper into this. Jonathan Crane from DW Sports joins me now here in person. So good to see you, Jonathan. All right, how significant is this decision by Wimbledon?
It's a pretty significant decision because Wimbledon has become the first Grand Slam to actually announce a move like this. It's kind of an outlier because at most tournaments, because tennis is organised by several different governing bodies, most tournaments, they do allow Russian and Belarusian players to compete as neutrals, only team events, as you mentioned, that they've been banned in. So, you know, Wimbledon is probably the best known tennis tournament in the world, right? It's a hugely prestigious tournament. And it's got this kind of conservative reputation in many ways. So the statement was actually surprisingly punchy. I'm going to read a bit of it to you now. It says, in the circumstances of such unjustified and unprecedented military aggression, it would be unacceptable for the Russian regime to derive any benefits from the involvement of Russian or Belarusian players with the championships. Now, Wimbledon has joined other sports in banning Russian and Belarusian athletes outright, for example, athletics, gymnastics and figure skating. So now I guess the question is whether other major tournaments, other Grand Slams in tennis, like the French Open, that's the next one, and then the US Open after that will follow suit, because at the moment, Russian and Belarusian players are still on the entry list.
Which players does this affect?
It affects several high-profile players, really. On the men's side, you've got Daniil Medvedev, who is the world number 2, Andrei Rublev as well, he's in the top 10. On the women's side, Aryna Sabalenka is perhaps the highest-profile women's player. She's from Belarus. She actually reached the semi-finals of Wimbledon last year, had a really good run in the tournament. Now, obviously, as you might expect, a lot of these players, once the war broke out, were asked what they thought about it. And while a lot of them kind of said, look, we support peace, no one really condemned the invasion or their country's involvement outright, apart from perhaps Andrei Rublev. I hope we can see some pictures of him now, because soon after the war broke out at one of the tournaments soon after that, this is what he wrote on the screen there. We're going to see it in a moment because the camera will turn around. But basically, it says, "No war, please." There you go. So he did kind of give a stronger stance because, you know, a lot of people will say, look, is this fair? Is it fair to ban individual players?
I mean, that was one of the first things that I was thinking about. I mean, is it fair? I mean, it's kind of punishment by association, or...
Yeah, I mean, as I said...
How are they justifying it,
Well, Wimbledon is an outlier, right? Because up until now, I think many inside tennis have been nervous at imposing this kind of collective punishment, saying, yeah, can individual sports stars be held accountable for the actions of their country's leaders? Now, I think Wimbledon had been discussing this with the British government for quite some time. They were kind of thinking of a compromise solution where they would allow Russian and Belarusian players to compete if they signed some kind of declaration saying that they didn't support the war. But that did kind of raise a few issues. One, would such a declaration be genuine? And two, could it put their family members in danger back home? Now, of course, the flip side is, OK, you can argue that it is unfair, perhaps, to ban these athletes, but what about the Ukrainian athletes who cannot compete at all because of the situation and the war in their countries?
Very fraught discussions. I'm sure this is not the last that we're going to hear about this, but so grateful to have you here, Jonathan Crane. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go now to Myanmar, where citizens struggle to return to democratic rule and may not now be making international headlines, but it is certainly very much alive. It's visible in people's attempts to boycott businesses owned by the military. The junta owns hundreds of enterprises involved in everything from telecoms to oil and gas, even beer. And it's here that Myanmar's people are taking a stand, one pint at a time.
A cool draft beer in a 19th Street bar is a popular way to unwind in Yangon's bustling downtown. But what beer you choose these days is a political statement. Drinkers are turning their back on Myanmar beer, once the most popular brew in the country, because of its links to the armed forces. They are sipping big international brands instead. All the restaurants in 19th Street used to sell Myanmar beer, but now I don't see any. Tiger, Tuborg and other brands have replaced it. Myanmar beer was backed by the Japanese brewing giant Kirin and seen as a sign of the economic liberalisation washing into the Southeast Asian country after the military relaxed its iron grip on power in 2011. It dominated the market, but brands without government links are on the rise. We know other beer brands are paying tax to the military, but we don't want all of our money going to them. We avoid it. If there's only Myanmar beer in the restaurant, then we don't drink beer. Restaurants don't sell the military's Myanmar beer, and people tend not to choose Myanmar beer anymore. Instead, we have to choose other brands, like Tiger. There is widespread public anger at the military's crackdown on dissent, which a local monitoring group says has killed more than 1,700 people. This has led to attacks on bars still serving the beer, and delivery trucks carrying the beer have been stopped and their cargo destroyed. The boycott is spreading to include other items with military links, including coffee and beauty products. Myanmar's consumers hope to fight the junta by putting a squeeze on the economy.
You're watching DW News. This is a reminder of our main story. Ukrainian forces holed up in the besieged port of Mariupol say the city could fall within days, if not hours. A Russian-imposed deadline for Ukrainian troops to surrender has passed. Efforts are underway to evacuate civilians from the city. You're watching DW News. Coming up next in DW News Asia, Afghanistan's poppy dilemma. The Taliban have banned it, but not really. So why? And alone and in the dark, why single mothers in China feel abandoned by the state. More on those stories and a whole lot more in just a moment with my colleague Birish Banerjee. I'm Layla Harak in Berlin. Thanks for watching.